on your side. This is WNCT 9 News at 6.
Outside today, we enjoyed a nice afternoon of weather in eastern North Carolina, but some changes getting set to move back in sooner rather than later. If you're going to head out to grab a bite to eat this evening, I think you'll be just fine. We don't really have any major thunderstorm activity close by at the moment, but you don't have to head too far away to see severe weather breaking out across South Carolina down into Georgia, where new tornado watches and warnings are in effect, and also a separate line of severe thunderstorms beginning to break out across the state of Tennessee. There's several different weather features that will eventually consolidate over North Carolina as we head into the day on Thursday. That's why Storm Team 9 Weather Alert Day will be in effect. We'll talk about all the potential and take you hour by hour coming up in your Storm Team 9 forecast. Longest running newscast in the East starts now.
911 calls and crime rates. How has the Jacksonville Police Department been doing these past few years of the pandemic? I'm Cheyenne Pagan with more from the Chief of Police coming up.
Plus, the state's U.S. Senate race heats up even more, how the Democrats are getting involved in the Republican primary.
And celebrating farmers across the East, how a local school is showing off what farmers do for the school and the entire community. But we begin tonight with a Hyde County Sheriff's deputy on administrative leave after shooting and killing a man. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ken Watlington.
And I'm Angie Quesada. Thanks for joining us. The SBI is now investigating the shooting that happened in Swan Quarter on Tuesday.
Officials say they were called to a home break-in on Main Street. They had during the 911 call. The caller said her ex-husband, 67-year-old Willie Blunt, kicked in the front door and had a gun. When deputies arrived, they found him standing on the porch with a gun. Officials say Deputy William Waters, a 10-year veteran with the agency, shot Blunt after he pointed the gun at deputies during a 10-minute standoff. The Hyde County District Attorney says they will now review all of the findings.
One local police department is breaking down their crime rates and calls. 32,000 911 calls came into Jacksonville Police just last year. 5 years ago, that number was slightly higher at about 35,000.
Police are staying positive about these numbers, but say they still have a long way to go. On your side, Cheyenne Pagan sat down with the Jacksonville Police Chief. She joins us now live just outside the department. Cheyenne, what did the chief tell you today?
Angie, Ken, Chief Yanero says despite a decrease of 911 calls and a decrease of overall crime, they say they are still seeing an increase in violent crime. But that's not the only thing they've seen during the pandemic. They've also had an increase in mental health emergencies and crisis intervention, and an uptick of car crashes too, with the amount of people moving in and out of the area because of the military. Despite this, 911 calls remain lower than in previous years. But when you take into account the number of people calling the 10-digit emergency number, they found more than half of their calls go to that instead. Last year, that line actually got over 100,000 calls, and that amount raises some concerns for the chief.
We do know that we need to do a better job of informing the public to use 911. And there could be a number of reasons. People think this is not really an emergency. I can just call the police department.
Encourages people to call 911 if they need a police officer for an emergency. And circling back to those crime rates, Chief Yanero emphasizes the importance of supporting the local police department to help keep those rates down. Angie, Ken?
And Cheyenne, out of all the calls they received last year in both to their 911 and the 10-digit line, how many required a first responder?
Angie, between both of those lines, 69,000 required a first responder. Live in Jacksonville, Cheyenne Pagan 9 on your side.
Also in Jacksonville tonight, an investigation is underway after an early morning fire at an elementary school. Here's what we know tonight. That fire happened at Hunters Creek Elementary School around 6 o'clock this morning. The reading classroom is a modular trailer located behind the main school building. No injuries are reported or no other structures were impacted. 9 on your side was able to speak with school officials after the fire.
We need to know what the cause was, and if it's something that that could happen in other buildings, then we certainly will address anything that we can address on that side of it to make sure everything is safe.
Onslow County Schools adding they have fire inspections regularly and they feel confident the other buildings are safe for teachers and students.
And in Kinston this afternoon, an international flight makes an emergency landing at the Global Trans Park. Emergency officials say the flight that was bound for New York from Antigua landed safely, thankfully. There were no injuries on the flight. WNCT is your local election headquarters, bringing you the latest. And tonight, a new attack ad is surfacing on the Republican primary in the race of U.S. Senate. But this one is from state Democrats. The ad ties some parts of the overall GOP platform, like tax hikes, to Congressman Ted Budd, former Governor Pat McCrory, and ex-Congressman Mark Walker. Both McCrory and Budd say they oppose these platforms, but former Democratic Senator Floyd McKissick Jr. says that it's up to the candidates to explain how their plans are different from the party's platform.
And the challenge is those are the policies identified the Republican Party. Those are the ones that they're going to be embracing. He will be a lone voice if he does not stand with them.
Democrats explain that those three are the only candidates mentioned because they're likely to get the most attention.
And tonight we're continuing our coverage of the WNCT poll that came out in partnership with Emerson College and The Hill. Yesterday, we looked at the U.S. Senate race, specifically the Republican primary.
Tonight, we're looking at the issues you, the voters, are talking about, and fair elections, as the state is one of those hot topics. 53% of you say that you believe North Carolina runs fair elections.
24% say they do not think we have fair elections in our state, while another 23% are tonight undecided.
And this year, at the center of the fair election conversation is the redistricting battle that went all the way to the state Supreme Court. After months of lawmakers drawing and redrawing the maps, the court ruled in February on the new electoral districts for this year's election. Candidates were then able to file, and when they did, they said it was good for people across the state to finally have a fair map.
It's been a long fight, but today was a really big win for everybody who cares about having access to the ballot and fair maps. After years of struggling, we have great maps that allow voters to have a real choice at the ballot box.
Those new maps also caused some shakeups for candidates who were planning to run for Senate. Democrat Jeff Jackson out of Charlotte was one of those candidates and decided to run for the United States House instead.
Another question asked by the poll was about sports betting in the state and whether it should be legal or not.
This one much closer, as 42% say gambling on sports in North Carolina should be legal. 37% saying they don't want it here in the state. 22% of voters say they're undecided on the matter.
And to the 37% of you that said yes, state lawmakers are trying to negotiate a bill they hope will pass this year to make sports betting legal. Right now, sports betting is only legal in the state in person at the Cherokee casinos. But this bill would allow people to place bets online. A version of it passed the Senate last year, but there are concerns, including whether the state is taxing it enough. Governor Roy Cooper says it's time for North Carolina to do this.
I think it's important for North Carolina to be in the lead to make sure we secure the thousands of technology jobs that will come.
The American Gaming Association says sports betting is legal in some form in 30 states currently, with online betting allowed in neighboring states of Virginia and Tennessee.
And finally, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, this WNCT poll finds that the majority of you think the U.S. should not send troops to the European country. 44% think troops should not fight the Russians, while 28% say troops should go. To see more of these questions and this poll, you can check out our website at WNCT.com.
And speaking of the war in Ukraine, the United States and European allies are once again escalating economic pressure on Russia with sanctions as Ukraine reports growing evidence of war crimes. These new sanctions target President Vladimir Putin's adult children. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's wife and daughter, and Russian Security Council officials. The Biden administration is also sanctioning Russia's largest financial institution, and the president is signing an executive order banning new investment in Russia.
We're going to keep raising the economic cost and ratchet up the pain for Putin and further increase Russia's economic isolation.
Meanwhile, on the ground in Ukraine, the Pentagon says Russian forces have withdrawn now from areas around the capital of Kyiv.
And in Washington, intense moments as oil executives are coming together before a House committee as AAA reports the national average for a gallon of gas is now $4.16 today. House Democrats unleashed on oil executives blaming the industry for skyrocketing oil and gas prices. But Republicans squarely blame the White House's, quote, anti-American energy policies like shuttering the Keystone Pipeline. Oil executives testified they have no control over the markets.
A farm expo at a local school is aiming to show their appreciation to farmers here in the East. They play a major role in food supply to locals and families all across the country. 9 on your side's Adriana Hargrove attended the farm expo at W.J. Gurganus Elementary School in Havelock, and where they're not only highlighting farmers, but the importance of nutrition education.
I spoke with the school nutrition director for Craven County Schools today, and she says their goal was to make sure students walked away with more knowledge on food nutrition and how to eat local. From egg production to dairy farming to learning about different produce and horticulture, students at W.J. Gurganus Elementary School learned all aspects of farming that takes place here in the state. They even had the chance to milk a cow through a dairy simulator. Lauren Wayand, the school nutrition director for Craven County Schools, says at lunchtime, students were served foods that were locally grown and produced here in North Carolina.
I think there is to me, growing up with that appreciation as to, wow, the farmers work hard to get food on the table, and that's where it starts. Wow. I think that turns a light bulb on in most people's head, and then they have a better appreciation and a love for food.
Wayand says teaching students about locally grown food starts at home.
You know, we need to educate our students. I think, parents, when you take the kids to the grocery store, point out, tell them, help me find the ones that are grown here in North Carolina.
One of the vendors at the expo were from the Craven Pamlico Beekeepers Association. The beekeepers taught a slew of topics, from helping farmers, importance of pollination, to safety when caring for bees. Looking into pollination, beekeepers say this is so important because without these steps, the food we eat wouldn't be available, and this overall balances ecosystems. Now, for a list of more events for Farm to School Week, you could head to our website at WNCT.com. In Havelock, Adriana Hargrove, 9 on your side.
And farmers across the state are now having to deal with the avian flu, better known as the bird flu. North Carolina now one of 23 states nationwide where the virus is infecting local poultry. The first case of the year was discovered in a commercial flock of turkeys in Indiana. Since then, the USDA is reporting new cases daily, and here in the East, cases were reported in Hyde, Carteret, and Dare counties as early as 3 weeks ago.
Up next, your complete Storm Team 9 7-day forecast. We've got some major changes getting set to move in, some of them welcome, some of them not. We'll talk about the details next.